The parking lot was nearly deserted, the desert air cutting cool against Marisol Vega's skin as she crossed toward her aging sedan. A single lamp flickered above, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. She had worked too late again, the numbers on invoices still dancing in her mind, and all she wanted was the short drive home and the comfort of silence. When she opened the door, she did not notice immediately that someone was already inside. But the moment she slid behind the wheel, a small hand clamped over her mouth. Her heart lurched violently until she recognized the trembling figure beside her. It was her niece, 10-year-old Celia, eyes wide and chest heaving, as though she had been running for miles. "Don't say anything," the child whispered, her voice barely a breath. "They're listening to us." Marisol froze confusion, nodding with fear. Celia had always been a bright and playful child, not prone to theatrics, but tonight her face was shadowed with something far heavier. The girl pulled her hand back slowly, her fingers still quivering. Celia Marisol managed, her voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" The answer did not come at once. Instead, Celia pointed toward the tall office building they had just left. Several windows glowed faintly against the night. Two silhouettes moved there, Elena Marisol's sister-in-law and Conrad Hale, the family's longtime attorney. Their heads bent close, movements sharp, deliberate. Celia's whisper broke the stillness. "They've been talking about you." "I heard them before they saw me." Marisol's pulse hammered. Elena's charm had always hidden an edge, one she had tried to ignore, but suspicion coming from a child's lips made it real. She lowered herself in the seat, pulling Celia down with her. Both of them crouched as the glow from the windows poured into the lot like unblinking eyes. Elena's hands moved as if slicing the air itself, while Conrad leaned stiffly beside her. Marisol turned to the child. "Tell me exactly what you heard." Celia hugged her knees, voice cracking. They were in the hallway. "I hid behind the supply cart. Aunt Elena said, 'She'll sign the papers any day now.' And then Conrad said, 'Once she signs, she sleeps.'" The words landed with brutal weight. Marisol stared, hoping the child had misheard, but Celia's clear, dark eyes held no fantasy. "Did they see you?" she pressed. Celia shook her head. "No. I ran out before they came back, but Aunt Elena said it had to happen soon." Tremors spread through Marisol's hands. Elena's sweetness had always carried a trace of condescension, but never had she imagined cruelty so deliberate. She started the engine, easing them away without headlights, until they reached the road. Celia remained silent, her small shoulders hunched as the streetlights flickered past. Instead of heading home, Marisol drove to a roadside diner, its neon buzzing faint against the night. Inside, the smell of coffee and bacon grease wrapped around them. She ordered a cup of black coffee for herself and warm milk for Celia. Once the waitress left, the girl leaned close. They said it was about papers. Something called a transfer. Aunt Elena told Conrad you'd trust her enough to sign without asking questions. The words clawed at Marisol's memory. Just last week, Elena had pressed her with honeyed persuasion, insisting that granting power of attorney would help the business while Marisol's son traveled. She had felt uneasy, but allowed Elena's charm to cover her doubt. Now those pieces cut sharp. Celia hesitated before adding, "I also saw an envelope marked supplements." Aunt Elena picked it up when she thought no one was watching. The earlier phrase, "once she signs, she sleeps," suddenly felt literal. Marisol stared into her coffee, the bitter steam, turning her mouth dry. Celia's eyes never left hers. "Auntie, they're planning something, aren't they?" Marisol reached across the table, covering the girl's trembling hands. Fear pressed from all sides, heavy and suffocating. Going home no longer felt safe. By the time they left the diner, the horizon was only beginning to lighten. Marisol dropped Celia at her mother's house, ensuring she slipped in quietly, then drove to her own home with dread knotted in her stomach. She did not sleep. Instead, she pulled the lockbox from her closet and spread its contents across the kitchen table. Deeds, contracts, shares the paper bones of a lifetime's work. With careful precision, she tucked them into a fireproof bag hidden behind linens. Then she placed a small recorder inside the desk drawer where Elena often liked to sit. Moving to her computer, she scanned documents and sent them to an independent accountant outside the family's reach. Once the files were gone, a calm settled over her. Yet when she combed through her business accounts, unease returned. Lines of consulting invoices appeared all under the name Mara Quint. Inflated sums labeled wellness advisory or strategic support. Yet Marisol had never hired such a person. The realization tasted bitter. She typed a message to Bram, a former director who had left after clashing with Elena. Bram, something is wrong. Call me. Only when the message showed delivered did she allow her body to slump against the chair, exhaustion pressing like lead. Dawn spilled across the conference room when she arrived at the office. Elena was already there arranging pastries as if for a celebration. Conrad sat with papers stacked neatly, eyes fixed on them rather than her. Marisol. Dear Elena purred, pouring tea, just a small breakfast before the day begins. A few routine signatures to make life easier. The folder slid across the table, tabbed and ready. The tea smelled floral, but beneath it lingered something sharp. Marisol set the cup aside untouched. A soft movement at the door caught her eye. Celia had slipped in unnoticed. She tugged Marisol's sleeve and whispered, "There's a black SUV outside. They've been there since you came in." Marisol's chest tightened, but she forced her face calm, her hand resting over Celia's to steady her. She nudged the teacup a few inches away, knowing she needed clarity for whatever came next. Bram met her later that morning at the entrance of the medical center where he now consulted. His expression was grim, a slim folder tucked under his arm. Inside, rows of invoices bore the name Mara Quint, each tied to inflated charges labeled consulting services. "She's not a consultant," Bram said quietly. "Mara is Elena's private therapist. The payments are bribes disguised as business expenses." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Marisol as she absorbed the truth. Elena wasn't only scheming for signatures, she was bleeding funds through a carefully hidden network. But another name gnawed at Marisol's mind. Juniper Vale, her longtime assistant. Juniper had always been efficient, yet recently she had grown distant, her gaze sliding away too often. Almost unwillingly, Marisol whispered, "She must have helped them." Bram hesitated before shaking his head. "Don't be so sure." Moments later, Juniper herself appeared down the hallway, clutching a clipboard to her chest, pale and trembling. "I'm sorry," she blurted, tears brimming. "I never wanted to. Elena said if I didn't give her access, my brother's visa would be revoked. He'd be deported within weeks." Her words spilled with desperation. "I only let her into the scheduling system. I swear I never touched the accounts." Her confession cut through Marisol not like betrayal, but like a wound shared. Juniper was not a conspirator, but another pawn cornered by Elena's cruelty. Bram placed a steady hand on Marisol's arm. "The real enemy is Elena. Don't waste your strength elsewhere." That night, the storm rolled heavy over the desert. Rain battered the windows of Celia's room as Marisol sat on the edge of the child's bed. Celia's nervous fingers twisted the blanket before she whispered, "Even here, I don't feel safe." From beneath her pillow, she pulled a small flash drive, hand shaking, as she placed it into Marisol's palm. "I copied it from Mr. Hale's laptop while he was talking to Aunt Elena." Marisol's breath caught. "Celia, you could have been caught." The girl's voice was barely louder than the rain. "I know, but you needed to see it. They said they were hiding the draft there." On the laptop, a memorandum of transfer opened, granting Elena full authority, in the event of Marisol's temporary incapacity. The phrasing was no accident. Incapacity was premeditated. Celia then pulled out her tablet thumb, hesitating before pressing play. The audio crackled, then sharpened into Elena's unmistakable voice. "She signs, then we manage the rest." The sound hollowed Marisol's chest. Her niece had risked everything to deliver undeniable truth. Pulling the child into her arms, she felt a surge of both fear and resolve. Cassia's plan was no longer suspicion. It was documented, and now there was no turning back. Days later, the boardroom smelled of lemon polish, the long table gleaming under the harsh lights. Marisol entered with Bram at her side and retired Judge Altha Rook just behind them, her quiet authority filling the room without a word. Investors sat scattered along the table, polite but curious. Elena was already at the head, her smile sharpened like glass, Conrad close by with a folder. "Marisol." "How wonderful," Elena greeted, voice smooth. "We've been waiting. Let's make this simple." She poured golden liquid into a porcelain cup and slid it across the table. "Chamomile with valerian root, it will calm your nerves." Marisol wrapped her fingers around the cup, but did not drink. "Routine documents, you said?" Conrad cleared his throat, eyes never lifting. "Yes, standard authority transfer, a safeguard." Bram leaned forward, voice cutting. "Funny how those safeguards always benefit the same person." Elena's smile faltered, but returned sharper. "We all want what's best for you." Marisol set the cup down carefully. "Then you won't mind transparency." With a gesture, she revealed the blinking red light in the corner. Cameras were live, and on the screen at the end of the table, an outside council member appeared via secure video. "This meeting is being observed. Every word recorded." Elena's mask cracked. Her lips pressed thin as her eyes darted toward Conrad, whose fingers twitched against the folder. Murmurs rippled among investors. Marisol slid the flash drive into the port, and the room filled with Elena's voice, cold and clear. "She signs, then we manage the rest." For the first time, Elena's smile did not return. "Marisol has had episodes," she snapped. "You've all seen her exhaustion. This paranoia proves she's unwell." Marisol answered with a sealed envelope, independent evaluations from her physician. "No impairment, no episodes." Silence fell as the papers passed down the line. Bram then laid a second folder on the table. "Here are the payment logs." Transfers routed to Mara Quint, Elena's private therapist, disguised as consulting invoices, inflated, unauthorized. Juniper, pale at the far end of the table, finally found her voice. "She forced me. She said if I didn't help, my brother would lose his visa. I only gave her access. I never touched the accounts." Tears spilled down her cheeks. Elena slammed her palm on the table. "Once she signs, she sleeps." The words exploded before she could stop them. Conrad blanched, horror carving lines across his face. Judge Altha's voice cut through the chaos, firm and steady. "Enough. This board is no longer safe under Elena's influence. I recommend immediate suspension pending investigation." The council member on screen echoed firmly, "I second that. Effective immediately." The weight of their words struck Marisol like a wave. Elena hadn't planned to sideline her for weeks or months. She had intended to silence her forever. For the first time, Marisol's hands felt steady, ready for whatever storm would follow. The courtyard cafe was quiet in the late afternoon, the fountain trickling as desert wind stirred the air. Marisol sat at a shaded table, the steam of her coffee curling upward while life around her moved with a freedom she had not felt in weeks. Elena was gone, suspended from every role, her charm stripped to nothing after her own words damned her. Conrad, pale and shaken now, answered investigators instead of issuing directives. Juniper, no longer under Elena's hold, had been placed under protection for her brother's case. And Bram, steady as always, was being considered for the position Elena had tried to steal. For the first time in months, Marisol allowed herself to breathe. She had spent the last few days drafting plans for something Elena could never touch. Not documents of surrender, but a fund to protect whistleblowers in small family businesses. No one should be forced into silence by fear. She sipped her coffee slowly until the sound of sneakers slapping against stone reached her ears. Celia bounded up the path, hair flying, eyes bright with the innocence she had nearly lost too soon. Sliding into the chair beside her aunt, she smiled nervously until Marisol took her hand. "Your voice saved us," Marisol said softly. The girl exhaled her shoulders, easing only after hearing it spoken aloud. Together, they shared a plate of sweet bread, the fountain bubbling behind them. Relief wrapped itself around Marisol, but it was not passivity. For years, she had believed silence preserved peace. Now she knew silence could be a cage. She would not lock herself inside it again. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of Elena's schemes slowly loosened from Marisol's shoulders. Still, shadows lingered. Rumors followed her through town, neighbors murmuring at the market, whispering about betrayal within her family. At church pews that once shifted away began to settle, though she could feel the eyes pressed into her back. She carried herself differently now, not with defiance, but with a quiet steadiness that refused to bend under gossip. At her office, the air felt different. Bram worked tirelessly, stabilizing accounts scarred by Elena's fraud. Juniper, though cautious, began to smile again, relieved to prove her loyalty where it mattered. Celia visited often, her presence a reminder of both innocence and courage. Yet the wounds had not fully closed. Marisol would open her briefcase and see Gabriel's old watch, her late husband's gift, resting against the documents, a reminder that betrayal often came closest to home. Then came the letter. Its envelope bore no return address, only Celia's neat scrawl across the front. "You need to read this." Inside lay a printed email chain between Elena and Conrad recovered from the flash drive. The words were clear, cold, and deliberate. Elena had not acted alone. She had planned every step with Conrad, using his legal authority as cover, promising him shares and influence once Marisol was declared incompetent. The betrayal cut deeper than she expected. Conrad had dined at her table, toasted her birthdays, called her family, and now his greed lay bare in black ink. Marisol folded the pages slowly, her resolve hardening. Elena had been stripped of power, but Conrad remained in shadows, still maneuvering with polished charm. She could not rest yet. One evening, as the sky bled red over the desert, Bram visited with more files. "It's worse than we thought," he admitted. Conrad funneled payments through shell accounts. "If the investigators don't move fast, evidence will vanish." Marisol clenched her jaw. "Then we make sure they move faster." She spent that night drafting letters, attaching records, sending them to state regulators and financial auditors. She no longer trusted silence, no longer trusted patience. Action was her new ally. Still, betrayal took its toll. She would sit alone on her porch, staring at the Sandia Mountains, wondering how many more nights her heart would ache from wounds carved by family. Celia often joined her, settling quietly with a blanket. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. One evening, the girl whispered, "Does it hurt less when you tell the truth?" Marisol turned, brushing hair from her niece's forehead. "It hurts differently, but it hurts less than lying." Weeks later, she received another shock. A letter from the jail carried a name she almost didn't open: Sergio, her estranged brother and Elena's husband. He had been absent during much of the turmoil, traveling abroad, leaving Elena to handle affairs. His words were clumsy, but filled with regret. He claimed ignorance of Elena's plot, insisting he had never meant for harm to come to Marisol. He begged for understanding, for a chance to speak. She placed the letter beside Gabriel's watch, unable to decide if it belonged to the pile of betrayals or the pile of regrets. The desert heat pressed hard that summer, cicadas buzzing through long evenings. Marisol poured herself into her new foundation, meeting women who had survived similar manipulations, widows coerced into signing over pensions, sisters tricked out of inheritances, mothers cast aside by children who valued property more than love. Each story echoed her own, yet each also carried resilience. At the Foundation's first gathering, a woman named Rosa took her hand and whispered, "You're proof we can still fight." Tears stung Marisol's eyes, not of sorrow, but of recognition. Still, Elena's shadow tried to reappear. News traveled that she had fled the state debts piling behind her. Rumors of casinos, lawsuits, and more lies followed. Conrad, meanwhile, faced depositions, his practiced calm fraying under the weight of evidence. Watching from a distance, Marisol realized she no longer burned with rage. What remained was a steadier flame, the determination to reclaim her dignity and guard it fiercely. One late afternoon, Celia brought her a small notebook filled with sketches, flowers, suns, and bright colors. "It's for you," she said shyly. Marisol turned the pages, tears rising as she realized the drawings mirrored her own garden. The child had captured every marigold and rose, each stroke a promise of life beyond betrayal. She pulled her niece into her arms, whispering, "You've given me back something I thought I lost." Marisol returned to her easel that night, paint spread across the table. Bold strokes of orange and gold swept across the canvas desert skies alive with fire. It was not escape, it was reclamation. Each brushstroke was proof she was not broken. Autumn crept into the desert with cooler nights and golden light spilling across the mesas. For Marisol, the season carried not dread, but renewal. She woke early, brewed her coffee, and sat on the porch as steam curled into the air. The silence no longer pressed like a threat, it breathed like freedom. Celia visited often after school, her chatter filling the house with a warmth Marisol had not realized she missed. Evenings were spent painting colors bold across her canvases or reading with her small circle of friends from the community center. She was learning not just to endure, but to live. Still echoes of the past lingered. At the market, neighbors whispered their curiosity, cutting sharper than any blade. Yet slowly, respect replaced gossip. They began to nod instead of sneer, their glances softer as time passed. Marisol carried herself with a new steadiness, her back straight, her voice calm, her dignity no longer negotiable. The foundation she had created grew stronger with Eduardo's guidance, a longtime friend of Gabriel's, who had stepped forward after Elena's downfall. Together they secured donors and expanded programs. The first scholarship recipient, Rosa, walked across the stage with her certificate in hand, tears shining in her eyes. Marisol sat in the audience, pride swelling. This was her legacy, not properties for greedy relatives to claw at, but opportunities for women who had been cornered by betrayal. Letters began arriving from Conrad, written in careful script from his holding cell. He admitted his role, but cloaked it in justifications, insisting Elena had manipulated him, that he had been trapped by her persuasion. Marisol read each one carefully, then folded it into a drawer beside Gabriel's watch. She did not respond. She was not ready. Perhaps she never would be. Love and loyalty had boundaries, and some had already been crossed too far. But then came something unexpected. One Saturday afternoon, while Marisol tended marigolds in her yard, a young man appeared at the gate. He was barely 20, his dark hair catching the sun. His posture respectful, yet nervous. "Mrs. Vega," he asked. "My name is Adrian. I'm Elena's son from before she married your brother. I don't know if she ever told you." Marisol froze, soil crumbling from her hands. Adrian held out a folder, his eyes so earnest they stole her breath. "I found my father a few months ago. He mentioned you. I wanted to meet my grandmother." The word struck harder than any betrayal. Grandmother. She studied him, heart tugging in directions she hadn't expected. His voice carried no demands, no schemes. He asked for nothing but a chance to know where he came from. She invited him inside cautiously, and they sat at the same kitchen table where Elena had once slid poisoned tea toward her. Adrian spoke of his childhood of struggles of determination to carve a path without help. He studied architecture at the university sketchbooks filled with adobe courtyards and desert light. His passion lit the room, and for the first time, Marisol felt family not as a chain, but as a choice. Adrian began visiting regularly. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes stories from class. He never asked about Elena unless Marisol mentioned her, and when she did, he listened quietly, neither defending nor condemning. That patience felt like a gift. She saw in him not Elena's shadow, but a spark of resilience that could not be smothered. Still, the past tested her resolve. One winter evening, she received a letter not from Conrad this time, but from Elena herself. The handwriting was sharp, the tone bitter. Elena accused her of destroying everything, of poisoning family against her, of clinging to power. Marisol read it once, then fed it to the flames of her fireplace. Ash was the only place for words meant only to wound. The holidays arrived, stripped of the old performances. There were no tense dinners staged to appease Elena, no forced smiles across tables. Instead, Marisol hosted a modest gathering with Celia Adrian and her friends from the community center. They ate tamales, laughed until the fire burned low, and lifted their glasses at midnight. To survival, Marisol toasted her voice steady. To boundaries, and to joy reclaimed. But not all wounds healed in warmth. A call came from Conrad's attorney informing her he might seek early release under probation. He wanted to see her. The request rattled her dredging memories of betrayal and fear. She sat long at her desk that night, Gabriel's watch cool under her fingers. Did she want to see him? The boyish man who once toasted her birthdays had vanished long ago, replaced by greed. In the end, she declined the meeting. Healing required timing, and she refused to be rushed. By spring, Adrian's sketches decorated her refrigerator, his designs bold with both tradition and innovation. Together, they planted new rows of marigolds, their laughter mingling with birdsong. One afternoon, he asked gently, "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" Marisol pressed soil around a plant and answered honestly, "Forgiveness isn't a door you fling open. It's a window you crack when the air grows too heavy inside. Right now it's still closed." Adrian nodded, respecting her pace. His presence became another kind of healing one she had never expected to find. At the library, Dolores, a friend from her book club, encouraged her to share her story at a community workshop. "People need to hear how you survived," she urged. Marisol hesitated, but eventually agreed. Standing at the podium, she told the truth in measured words of a sister-in-law who betrayed her, of an attorney who schemed, of the courage it took to hold her ground. The audience listened in silence, some nodding with tears in their eyes. When she finished, the applause was not pity, but respect. Walking home that evening, Marisol felt lighter, as though years of shame had finally lifted from her shoulders. The seasons turned again each day, now filled with choices she made for herself. The house that once felt haunted by betrayal had become a sanctuary of laughter, sketches, and new traditions. Her walls bloomed with canvases of desert skies, each stroke proof that freedom had returned. Summer returned to the desert with its heavy heat and restless cicadas buzzing through long evenings. But for Marisol, the season no longer carried the weight of survival. It carried rhythm days that began with fresh coffee on the porch, afternoons of paint on her fingers, evenings filled with laughter at the community center, or quiet talks with Adrian. What once felt like ruins of betrayal had transformed into the foundation of something stronger. Adrian thrived at the university, his sketches turning into full projects. One evening, he spread blueprints across Marisol's dining table, speaking with a passion that made her eyes shine. He wanted to design sustainable housing rooted in New Mexican tradition adobe courtyards that captured light and kept families connected. Marisol listened with pride swelling in her chest, thinking of Gabriel and how he would have adored seeing a grandson so determined to build rather than destroy. "You carry the best of us," she told Adrian softly. His shy smile said more than words. Meanwhile, Conrad remained at the margins. Under probation, he worked at a mechanic's shop, his letters arriving sporadically. They carried fewer excuses now, more reflection notes about engines rebuilt, counseling sessions, attended nights spent praying instead of scheming. Marisol read them without anger, but she did not reply. She kept them folded in the drawer beside Gabriel's watch. Forgiveness, she knew, was not a switch, but a path. She might walk it someday, but not yet. Elena never resurfaced in person. Rumors drifted in from neighboring states, gambling debts in Las Vegas, lawsuits in Phoenix, whispers of charm turned to ruin. Marisol felt no triumph, only a weary clarity. Some people carved their own downfall, and no amount of rescue could stop the collapse. The Scholarship Foundation continued to grow. With Eduardo's steady counsel, Marisol expanded its reach beyond the county. Letters poured in from women who had once been silenced widows, who returned to school grandmothers, who built small businesses, sisters who finally claimed their inheritance without shame. Each note reminded Marisol that pain could be transformed, that her suffering had not been wasted. The legacy she built was not money for grasping hands, but dignity reborn in others' lives. On a bright spring afternoon, she stood at the podium of the University of New Mexico, addressing a room full of young faces. Her voice was clear, carrying through the hall. Love without respect is not love. Sacrifice without choice is not devotion. And silence is not always patience, it can be surrender. Do not surrender yourselves, not even for family. Boundaries are not walls. They are bridges that carry respect. Applause thundered, but what struck her deepest were the students who approached afterward, thanking her with tears in their eyes. Walking back to her car, she felt as if decades of shame had been lifted from her skin. Life grew into smaller joys. Saturday markets with Adrian afternoons painting marigolds, blazing orange evenings on the porch with Celia and her friends laughing at stories that once would have been buried in silence. The house no longer felt haunted, it had become a sanctuary again. But one early autumn evening, Conrad appeared at her gate. He did not step inside, only stood on the sidewalk with his hands open. His voice was quiet, stripped of all arrogance. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for not saving me this time. It forced me to save myself." Marisol studied him, the lines of weariness etched deep, the humility finally real. For the first time, she saw a glimmer of the man he might have been, not buried, but struggling toward light. "That's your work, Conrad," she replied steadily. "Not mine." His eyes brimmed, but he nodded, turning away without asking for more. She did not call after him. Forgiveness would never mean forgetting, but it did mean release. By winter, Marisol felt more at peace than she ever had. Her walls were bright with canvases of sunsets and desert blooms, each painting a declaration of freedom. Neighbors waved with respect instead of pity. She was no longer the bitter widow painted by gossip, nor the frightened woman cornered by family. She was Marisol Vega, resilient, steady, whole. On New Year's Eve, she hosted a small gathering at her home. Adrian, Celia, Eduardo, and a handful of friends filled the rooms with warmth. They ate, they laughed, and when fireworks burst over the sandias, Marisol raised her glass. To survival, to boundaries, and to joy reclaimed. Glasses clinked, and in that instant she felt Gabriel's presence not as a ghost of loss, but as a reminder of the life they had once dreamed of building. Later, sitting alone on the porch, she whispered into the desert sky, "Never again will I surrender my time, my voice, or my dignity." The words did not feel like defiance. They felt like truth. And to you listening now, remember this. Love is not measured by how much of yourself you erase for others. True love honors boundaries, respects dignity, and makes space for both giving and receiving. Dignity is not granted by others. It is claimed, protected, and carried like a torch no one can extinguish. If this story moved you, please like, share, subscribe, and comment below to support more stories like this. Because sometimes the greatest legacy is not wealth, but the courage to reclaim yourself.